All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're basically becoming legal detectives, stepping back a couple thousand years to solve this really fascinating puzzle from the Talmud. The case? It's all about the proper fit of a high priest's uniform. Now, that might sound like a tiny detail, but as we're going to see, the debate over it, well, it reveals some seriously profound ideas about law, tradition, and what it even means for something to be perfect.
So here's the big question that kicks everything off. Just how perfect did these sacred garments really need to be? Were they considered valid for service in the temple? And we're not just talking about looking presentable. We're talking about, spiritual, cosmic fitness. Did every single thread, every inch have to be absolutely perfectly precise? So our investigation starts with the clothes themselves. We're going to begin with what looks like a super simple rule. But as you're about to see, this rule almost immediately unravels into a major contradiction. And that sets the stage for our entire mystery. Okay, so let's start with a ruling from this great sage Shmuel. And on the surface, it seems totally straightforward. He basically says, look, if the priest's robes are a little too long and they drag on the ground, that's okay. They're still fit for service. But if they're too short, raised up above the ankles, nope, unfit. Simple enough, right? A little long is fine, a little short is not. But wait. Hold on. The Talmud immediately throws a wrench in the works. It presents this other ancient source, a Baraita, that says the complete opposite. It says that even vestments that were raised up are considered perfectly fit for service. So, now what? We have a direct contradiction. Shmuel says raised is unfit. This other source says raised is totally fit. How can both possibly be true? So, enter our first detective, Rabbi Rami Bar Hama. He comes in with a potential solution. He clarifies what Shmuel must have meant. He says, look, when Shmuel said raised up robes are unfit, he was only talking about robes that were just made too short from the get-go. They were fundamentally the wrong size to begin with. And here's the other half of his brilliant argument. That conflicting source, the Baraita, it wasn't talking about clothes that were made too short. No, it was referring to a full-length, perfectly made robe that the priest just happened to hitch up for a moment with his belt. See? Two totally different situations, two different rulings, problem solved, case closed. Or is it?
Yeah, just when you think we've got it all figured out, the plot thickens. Another major sage steps onto the scene, and he's got a much, much stricter interpretation that just throws our tidy little solution into complete chaos.
This sage's name is Rav, and let's just say he doesn't do compromises. He states, flat out, that both cases are unfit. A robe that's dragging on the ground, unfit. A robe that's too short, also unfit. For Rav, the fit has to be absolutely perfect. Not too long, not too short, period.
Well, this creates a huge problem, doesn't it? If Rav is right and any little imperfection in the length makes the whole thing unfit, then how in the world does he explain that pesky Baraita we keep talking about? The one that explicitly says raised up vestments are perfectly fine. His own strict rule seems to be completely contradicted by this ancient source. So, how do you save Rav's opinion? Well, another scholar, Rabbi Zera, comes to the rescue. And he does it with this absolutely brilliant rereading of the evidence. He says, hey, maybe that source isn't talking about two different kinds of robes at all. Maybe it's describing one single action. You take a robe that was made too long, which is unfit, and you use the belt to hitch it up to the perfect height. Only then, after you fixed it, is it fit. It's a really clever interpretation that keeps Rav's strict rule intact. Now, to really understand the deep legal idea behind this entire debate, the Talmud does something really surprising. It takes a detour and presents an analogy. And as you can see, we're shifting gears to what seems like a totally different case, the mystery of the five-cornered garment. I know it seems completely unrelated, but trust me, it holds the key to everything.
Okay, so a little context first. The Torah commands that these special fringes, called tzitzit, have to be placed on the corners of any four-cornered garment you wear. It's a very specific rule, and it's tied directly to that number of corners, 4.
So, the rule seems pretty clear. A garment with 3 corners, you're exempt. A garment with 4 corners, you're obligated. You got to put the fringes on. But what about a garment with 5 corners? Does it need these ritual fringes or not? This, believe it or not, became a huge point of debate.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting. Because the debate isn't actually about counting corners. It's about a fundamental legal idea, a concept we can call the extra principle. What do you do with an extra part of something that isn't essential to its main definition?
So you've got two major schools of thought here. One group, let's call them Sage A, says that the fifth corner doesn't change a thing. You just ignore the extra bit. At its core, it's still a four-cornered garment, so it's obligated. But then you have Sage B, who argues that, no, that extra fifth corner is significant. It fundamentally changes the garment into a whole new category, a five-cornered garment, which is exempt.
And boom, there's the connection back to our case. The extra fabric of the priest's robe dragging on the ground, it's exactly like that fifth corner. Shmuel, the one who said dragging robes are fine, he's like Sage A. He thinks you just ignore the extra, non-essential fabric. But Rav, our strict guy, he's like Sage B. He believes that extra fabric is significant and it fundamentally disqualifies the entire garment.
So we've gone deep on the length, but our investigation is not over yet. The Talmud now pivots to a final and honestly fascinating question. It's about the very material of the vestments themselves, and this whole thing hinges on the meaning of a single three-letter Hebrew word, bad.
It's incredible! From this one little word, bad, the sages derived this whole list of requirements. The garments had to be made of fine linen, they had to be brand new, their threads had to be twisted from multiple plies, and each of those threads had to be folded 6 times. It even implies that no ordinary, non-sacred clothing could be worn underneath it. I mean, a whole universe of law packed into a single word.
But that leads to an even more basic question, right? All of those interpretations only work if you know from the start that bad means linen. How did they even know that? It's not obvious at all. Where did that fundamental piece of the puzzle come from?
The Talmud actually offers 2 proofs. The first one is this really clever wordplay argument. Bad sounds like the Hebrew for on its own, and flax, linen, is a plant where each stalk grows on its own from the ground. The second proof, though, seems way more solid. There's a verse from the prophet Ezekiel written centuries later that explicitly says priests wear pishtim, which is the definite Hebrew word for linen. Seems like a slam dunk.
But then, just when you think it's all settled, the brilliant sage Rav Ashi asks this absolutely devastating question. He says, wait a minute, before Ezekiel came along, from where did we derive this? Think about it. The law of the priestly garments comes from the time of Moses, hundreds and hundreds of years before Ezekiel was even born. You can't use a later book to prove a more ancient law. So, how did they know? And here it is, the profound conclusion to our entire investigation. The knowledge didn't come from analyzing a text at all. It was an ancient tradition, something passed down orally from teacher to student, generation to generation, all the way back to the time of Moses. All Ezekiel did, centuries later, was write down a verse that acted as a kind of anchor in the text, a confirmation of a truth that they already knew. It's just a powerful statement about the interplay between written scripture and unwritten living tradition. Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. From the length of a hem to the number of corners on a garment, we've seen how these tiny little details can be debated with such incredible intensity. It really makes you wonder, when does a small detail stop being small and become the very thing that defines the whole?